I used to be a solo agent, and then I had a team. I absolutely loved working with a team. And then I decided to go into leadership, and then I went into management and managed an office, and then worked for a company that I loved. And when it was time to move on from that, the next thing was, okay, now to keep it new and fresh and interesting, I'm going to try to start something completely different, right?
I'm here with Todd Shively, designated broker and founder of Ensemble Real Estate here in Seattle. Todd, you've had various leadership positions in real estate over the 20 plus years we've known each other.
Amazing.
Board of directors of the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. What do you have going on this summer?
Oh man, we are doing everything we can. My husband and I are trying really hard to stay close. And with the exception of a week in Colorado, we're going to go spend some time with the family at a ranch near Colorado Springs. With the exception of that, we're pretty much doing that. And we thought we had all this time, and then all of a sudden it's 4th of July. But the weekends are filling up. But we're doing our best to, we asked ourselves, why are we leaving the best place in arguably the country, in the best months? So, we're going to stick around. How about you guys?
Oh, that should be amazing. Well, we are in the middle of a move, so once that's complete, I'll have a little more, mental space for the rest of the summer.
But you've already got some time off. You went to Wyoming.
I did, Went to Wyoming.
Got some fish, rode some horses.
Did both, horseback riding, fly fishing, kind of a
couple Western guys.
A bucket list trip.
On the dude ranches.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You're also an avid golfer. Do you have any destination golf courses on the radar for the summer?
No, I have recently just thrown my golf clubs away.
Oh, you threw them away?
Yeah, I just threw them away. I gave them to a friend and said, here, you try these out because they're not working for me. Just came down. I had played too much golf in a brief period of time. It's not a good thing to do. We came back from a really fun week, though. We played at Chambers Bay, Salish Cliffs, and the home course all on a weekend. That was fun. I did not throw my clubs away after that. But just after that, then I played too much golf. But having that time and money back right now is okay. I'm like, this isn't so bad.
You'll fill it with other fun things.
Yeah, my husband appreciates it very much.
Okay.
He doesn't care if they come back. Those clubs come back into the house.
Okay, that's awesome. There's been a lot of news over the last year about the National Association of Realtors and the NAR settlement. But I want to take a second to actually ask you about the Northwest Multiple Listing Services recent legislation and kind of how that ties in with NAR and how it's different and why.
Well, you mentioned recent changes essentially, and honestly, it's not an enormous amount of change. It's more staying the course with some added flexibility for consumers, which is really important, I think, to the Northwest MLS, is that buyers and sellers have as much clarity, transparency, and stability. It's such an important part of real estate is the stableness, right? And they know what they're going to get, and they know what the experience is going to be, and they know in advance what their costs are going to be and how that's structured. And so 5 years ago, Northwest MLS said, we're going to begin publishing to whoever wants to publish it. We feed out the seller's offer of buyer brokerage compensation, and that could be as little as zero, right? They said it's whatever that is. There's no direction from the MLS about what compensation should be, right? Just a spot where if you want to offer some, you can put a number there. And that was considered, just absolutely like wild that we would put that information out there, but it's like, well, that just makes sense, right? Buyers are often coming to the table with a buyer's agency agreement. They need to know, is the seller offering a credit towards those costs for them at close? So that was 5 years ago. And since that happened in 2022, the MLS made the decision to decouple compensation. So instead of paying the listing office and then having the listing office pay the buyer brokerage office, the seller actually then had the option to say, I want to pay this much money to the listing broker. I want to pay this much money to any buyer brokers who show up. And those are separate, totally negotiable costs. And so we've been tooling based on, when I say we, I mean we in the Seattle marketplace have been tooling how the consumer gets this information and makes decisions based on their feedback for years, right? So when the NAR settlement was announced in March, most of the things that were covered in that settlement were already addressed here. right? And we are not an NAR. We're not a Realtor Association-owned MLS. We're an independent, nonprofit, cooperative owned by all the real estate companies that participate. And there's 35,000 brokers in that organization. And so there was no mandate, because of that lack of affiliation, for us to participate in the settlement. There was an option to. Northwest MLS could have bought into that, but made the decision not to. That's kind of the headline, if you will, because not joining the National Association of Realtors is kind of the headline, right? Because most other independent MLSs are just taking that track because they haven't already done the things that the Northwest MLS has done, right? But the one thing that lingered is publication of compensation. And publication of compensation, Northwest MLS firmly believes, gives sellers and buyers the information they need to make smart decisions in a real estate transaction, right? Starting in 2024, the state of Washington now requires every single buyer who is represented by a Washington licensed real estate agent or broker has to have a buyer's agency agreement. It's long been the law on the seller side, but it was optional on the buyer side. So if you're receiving buyer brokerage services up until 2024, you may or you may not have signed a buyer agency agreement, which basically says what services are being provided, how long is that relationship, and then what's the cost of that service. And then it defines who's going to, how you're going to structure offers around that cost. But that was optional until the first of the year. Now, every single person has it, and they should. That was really, the real estate community really lobbied for that support for consumers to say, if you're going to have a contract or you're going to have an obligation, you need to know what it is, and you need to know what it's going to cost. So when the Northwest MLS made the decision not to join the NAR settlement, they did sort of take a position and say, we don't think that it's in the consumer's best interest to not have offers of compensation from sellers published in a place where the buyers can find it, right? Because every single buyer now has a buyer's agency agreement, and they come to the table with some obligation to pay the buyer broker.
Yeah.
And we don't have any idea what that is. That's negotiated between the buyer and the buyer's broker, right? But everyone is showing up with that. And so as a seller, if you want to create a competitive space and you've got two houses that are listed the same amount and they're relatively the same and a buyer is trying to make a decision between the two, as a seller, I want the option to publish that I am also going to include an offer of compensation at a certain amount so that I, as a buyer, know what my actual costs are.
So you're not taking the Northwest MLS's position. To me, seems like they didn't want to take that right away from a home seller to say, I want to advertise that I'm willing to pay this for these professional services.
Right, and so now the seller has a complete option. They can say, I don't want to offer anything. They can say, I want to offer a specific amount, and they can let the buyer know that in advance, which I think is very smart. Or they can also say, I don't want to start with a price, but if you ask me for compensation as a part of the offer, then I'm willing to include that.
With buyer's agency becoming law, without knowing how much a seller was going to pay, as the finance guy, I can see all kinds of situations in which a deal would unravel, where a buyer has signed an agreement to compensate their real estate agent, but then there's a house listed, and that seller isn't telling the market how much they're willing to compensate. Do you see, as these scenarios work out in practical ways, do you see this potentially going all the way back to the courts to go, the intention didn't work out the way it was planned?
Frankly, speaking personally, I'm not even exactly sure what the intention is here, right? I do not understand how having that level of transparency over the numbers, right, the offers of compensation to the parties involved, isn't to the benefit of the consumer. Right? That doesn't make sense to me personally. So going back to they've got these settlements, and the settlements are now under review. and the consumers are saying that the settlements aren't big enough, but when you break them down by the number of people involved, they're not large numbers. It's not correcting anything. It's not offering a benefit really of any quantifiable level that makes any sense to me. It's just been a lot of headache for these homeowners and a lot of win for the attorneys, which is often the case in these situations, right? When it trickles down to the individual consumer, there's not really that much of a benefit. What the individual consumer needs to do is take responsibility for negotiating what their costs are going to be when they are at the point of a transaction. When you sit down with a buyer's agent, let them define their value and decide how much you want them to be compensated. And they will decide if that's enough, right? You get to that number together and then it's done. And then when you go to make an offer on a house, you will either ask the seller for that or the seller will make an offer of some number towards that. Maybe all of it, often all of it, I think. But we'll see how much that changes. I think there are sellers out there who are super excited to say, I no longer have to offer compensation. They're 100% right. And that might work out great for them because the buyers that come to them might have enough money to pay for qualified representation. Who I worry about are the people that don't have that option. Right?
Well, that's who comes to my mind too.
Yeah.
I had a conversation this morning with a first-time buyer buying a home at an entry-level price point, which in Western Washington, finding a home for sale under $500,000, this one was in the mid 400s, is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about this client. Now, these changes are still evolving, but I don't know how they would come up with 1%. I mean, $4,000 or $5,000, if they don't know what a seller is offering for compensation, this deal might not get put together because it's not transparent, which seems to be just not in the spirit of what they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
How are we going to put this deal together for these people who want to buy their first home?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know what the costs are.
How is less transparency better?
Because the law says that they can't tell them what the cost is going to be.
Yeah.
Or what portion of the costs are going to cover, I guess is the more accurate way to say it. So this is...
And there's some indication that can be that those in the NAR-owned MLSs, that information could live somewhere else, but it just cannot be in the listing, which really boggles my mind because that's where all the rest of the information is, right? And this is not the same as asking a seller for a credit for a roof or for a furnace or for some other thing.
No.
Because those are, well, they're extremely important. They are somewhat optional, right? There is no option. There is a contractual duty that's been created between a buyer and a buyer's broker to pay for the services they're receiving, right? And that will happen at close every time. It's like a loan origination fee or it's like excise tax. Like it's going to happen every time there's a sale. So not giving the buyer the information about what to expect is a little weird to me, but it's also a negotiation between the parties. It's right there on the first page of our purchase and sale agreement. That's another thing, talk about transparency. There's a agreement between the buyer and the buyer's broker about how much they're going to get paid for their services. And then on the first page of the contract, there's agreement between the buyer and the seller about how much they're going to offer the buyer, how much the seller is going to offer the buyer towards that cost.
So working with experienced, highly qualified real estate agents and lenders to get these deals put together is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, it is. And having, the best people in the room doing the work is obviously essential. I do think this is going to have some ramifications for people who don't have value to offer in exchange for compensation.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely,
that's a real thing, right? There's a range of skills here,
right? And
there's a range of value for the skills.
Yeah.
And so, there's going to be people who are happy to represent buyers for whatever that dollar is. That's a smaller one than the people at the other end of the continuum, and that's good, right? Like it's good that people have options and they can decide what they need for their circumstances. The problem is that if people are struggling to put the finances together in the first place, and then they have to make a compromise on who they hire, right? Now they're getting less qualified representation. And that feeds a cycle that we've seen too much of in other places, right? And I don't think it's healthy for the housing market. I don't think it's healthy for underrepresented home buyers.
Okay, perfect segue into the next question. So, Todd, you've had a lot of successes over the last 20 years. I've watched them. What are some of the challenges that you've had over your career that you can say you've overcome looking back at?
Well, I think stagnation for a lot of us when we've been in the business for 20 years, and it's a wonderful, incredible industry that I love so much, and I think it's absolutely vital in our economy and for our homeowners. But, after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, pushing towards the next big round number, there's just a lot of burnout for folks. The way I experience that is in conversation with some of my favorite brokers in the city from all brokerages. And there are so many of them who are not having as much fun anymore, and they're feeling like the pressure of the thing because it is so constant, right? Real estate is not a career where you take the hat off and put it on the shelf and then you get the next 12 hours or your next 16 hours of your day just to yourself, right? It's an all the time thing. We work when other people don't, and when we're on vacation, we're thinking about it, and people are very passionate about this work, and so it's just kind of always on, right? You're always on. That can really wear people out, and so for me, how I've overcame that is I just shifted. I used to be a solo agent, and then I had a team. I absolutely loved working with a team, and then I decided to go into leadership, and then I went into management and managed an office, and then worked for a company that I loved. And when it was time to move on from that, the next thing was, okay, now to keep it new and fresh and interesting, I'm going to start something completely different, right? So that's because I have the desire and the capacity to change, right? There isn't a career path necessarily in real estate. There's becoming a manager, becoming an owner, becoming a team leader, becoming a coach, maybe picking up mortgages too, trying to just have variety. But if you're not going under one of those paths, just doing the same thing all the time, no matter how different it is all the time, can be pretty overwhelming.
Todd, how does the current market compare to other time periods? We've seen a variety of different markets over the last couple of decades. Do you think this market has some resemblance to others? Or is it totally unique?
Well, it's felt unique, and now I'm beginning to see kind of around the edges some things that we saw last time, like, for example, what we used to call ninja loans, sort of showing back up, right? These no income, no job applications. Like, we're seeing the availability of consumer products on the lending side that you would obviously know more about than I do, but like the presence of these not subprime loans, but kind of similar instruments is concerning to me because what's implied is we've run out of well-qualified buyers and now we have to go to less qualified buyers in order to keep momentum. I don't think that's true at all. And I also think that one of the things that we've been saying consistently is we're protected from some of the things that happened during the Great Recession because we're not making the same mistakes. We've got better qualified buyers putting larger amounts down where they have to meet rigorous qualifications. There's a far more exacting process for getting qualified to buy a house. And houses are a lot more expensive. And so we felt like we were really taking good care of that.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing, what happens in a system such as ours is that the desire to continue finding places to make money begins to introduce options that are not necessarily as good for the consumer.
Interesting. I see your point. I see it maybe from a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah.
So post Great Recession,
Yeah.
federal regulation around lending got super, super tight.
Yeah.
We may be one of the most regulated industries in the country, maybe in the world. So what I experienced on the financing side was a long period where very well qualified people couldn't get a loan.
Yeah.
And an example would be a self-employed entrepreneur, runs a company, runs a great company, an organization, has employees, has been doing it for a long time, and their tax returns have write-offs that really don't impact their ability to qualify, but because of this super narrow box that was created, we were telling really highly qualified people in terms of their ability to pay a mortgage payment, no. What emerged out of this were lenders who saw an opportunity to serve a group of people who couldn't get a mortgage. bank statement loan.
Yeah.
DSCR loan.
Yeah.
I won't go into those, but these are like
loans for specific professions.
loans where a professional has the cash flow.
Yeah.
Here's 12 months of
Yeah.
bank statements. You can see all the money coming in every month. You can see there's clearly a year or two history of this cash flow. But the traditional underwriting methods won't work. So I could see your point on one hand where it feels like credit markets are loosening. From my vantage point, those credit markets aren't any looser than they have been over the last 10 years. There's just a new kind of common sense loan type emerging out of Wall Street.
And I'm down with that, right? I am absolutely, that is not my concern. My concern is what's the next evolution of that, right? When you run out of those people, who next? And there's the machine grinds on. Do think that we are about to see a lot more opportunity for home buyers in Seattle within the next 5 years. We are going to see inventory increase because where we are loosening it on the residential real estate side is under city code for building, right? So now you're going to be able to put a lot more density into every neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
And the goal of that is to return what we consider missing middle housing, right? Folks that are in the middle of the pack and have been pushed out of the city because of the lack of inventory keeping prices so high, right? I used to laugh when I was just a young boy selling real estate in the early 2000s that we would never see home prices drop here because we're not building any more land. We've got traffic and mountains and water and all the things. Those are still true, but we did see, right, because of the sort of weakening of the foundation of the real estate market on the financial side, we did have that tragedy, right? And we had a huge amount of inventory and people were buying it and prices were dropping.
Right.
I still kind of feel that we're relatively insulated from some of those things, just the simple lack of land. We've got climate migrants, right, coming because they think it's better to be here than other places, following the water in a lot of cases. It's a beautiful city. It's a well-run area writ large. I think it's a good place to live, and that's going to continue to push demand. But I think that adding units is going to be a good thing. Now I just hope that we put good units into the marketplace, right? Because we don't necessarily build enough beautiful housing anymore. And and I think that would be a really nice priority. I'd like to see people build, take some of that growth that they're going to experience from being able to build a lot more homes and take some portion of that and make better houses.
So we're seeing an example of that with zoning changes in Seattle. DADUs, detached accessory dwelling units, attached accessory dwelling units. So a classic Seattle home on a 10,000 square foot lot, now a home builder can buy that property, keep and maybe renovate the existing property, add an attached dwelling unit and a detached dwelling unit, and now create 3 housing units.
And that works great, except that one person still owns all those. So if you have a single family home and you own it and you can add an ADU inside your structure and then have a DADU in the back, you still own all that. So what this is going to allow hopefully what the zoning changes that have been put through by the state legislature, which are coming down to the city level, are going to allow is that you can actually break those up, right, and sell those units individually and do it a lot more aggressively regardless of what the actual current zoning is. So those have been pocketed and stuck in specific places, and now people throughout the city are going to have the option to decide whether they want to do that with their lot or not. And so instead of one person having multiple units on a property, you're going to have multiple people in those multiple units with ownership, and that's a big deal.
And so what we're seeing right now is those 3-unit properties being condominiumized in some cases and sold individually.
Usually what they're doing in the condominiumization, and when we're God, it's such a horrible word, right? When we take these single family lots and condominiumize them, right? Turn them into condos, meaning that everybody owns the physical structure, the land together, and then they own the, exclusive right to their individual units, right? So it does require the construction almost all times of something new. Not always, but most of the time, if you're going to get the highest and best return, you're going to take an existing house and instead of plunking a DADU in the back, which we sometimes see them do, you raise it and you put 3 units or 4 units on it instead because you can actually get more when you condominiumize it. Now, you're not going to need that overlay of condominium management and association in order to have those lots broken up.
Okay. So
that's the goal.
So what we're going to see are 2, 3, and 4 units on a lot that may or may not all be attached.
Right.
That can be sold individually, not as condos.
That's right. That's the goal. That's where we're headed with this. And then within a certain range from large transit hubs, you'll be able to put more homes onto those, right? There is still some variance for trying to centralize density, which is important. But that really helps with the resource allocation and allows, a more vibrant commercial area to develop around those spots with the most people. But I think, we don't have the master plan from Seattle yet. They have not put it out. It will be late, and when we get it, it'll be really interesting to see. I expect a lot of progressive leadership on it.
Todd, thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
This has been great.
Sure
I really appreciate it. How should agents, brokers, potential buyers, or sellers reach you and your team?
Ensemble PNW, right? Pacific Northwest, ensemblepnw.com for the website, or find us on Instagram at ensemble.pnw. You can see a lot about who we are as an organization on our Instagram page. We invite you to check that out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.